The first morning in Constantinople, let your body settle. Let your breath soften. The present day is behind you now, and before you stretches the long, slow rhythm of another world. One with no phones, no emails, no rushing between tasks. Only stone streets, lamplight, and the slow cadence of a life shaped by tides. We begin, as they did, in the quiet before dawn. All throes in the breath of the city, the darkness just before sunrise, holds its own kind of stillness. The city has not yet stirred. In this moment, Constantinople lies draped in its own silence, where the sun will soon rise over the sea. Its name is a testament to power and vision. Constantinopolis, the city of Constantine. Your dwelling is humble, built of stone and timber, with a single shuttered window and a roof of dark red clay tiles. But so too is loneliness. The hearth stands at the center, a shallow stone bowl blackened from years of fire. Near it, tools for cooking, a clay pot, a long-handled spoon. The echo of a the wooden board struck rhythmically by a monk to summon others to prayer. The Orthros hour. Though you are not clergy, the sound still marks time. It folds the day like a cloth. You light a small beeswax candle and place it. It glows softly, casting warm golden light across the room. On a feast day, you might have a boiled egg, but today is not a feast. It is an ordinary, and that, too, has its comforts. Rain from the night before lingers in the joints between stones, forming tiny rivulets that gleam silver in the early light. Ivy grows along the low walls, and you hear the cooing of doves from the rooftops above. There is no glass, only linen to keep the draughts away. This one lies near the ancient cistern of Etiop, a massive subterranean reservoir built generations ago, whose cool waters have supplied this quarter of the city through sieges, droughts, and floods alike. In the corner, a jug of water left from yesterday. The water smells faintly of limestone and moss, clean but old. Cool against your skin, it carries the scent of underground silence, earth and salt, smoke and yeast. It is too early, and words are not yet needed. The sun rises over the sea, gilding the towers of the Blasherni Palace. Church bells begin to ring, some low and sonorous. She laughs, her voice high and clear, a single bright note in the otherwise muted morning. An older woman with a jar of milk balanced on her hip. An apprentice examines a scrap of vellum for his master. Only the slow, measured rhythm of a city alive with trade. No one hurries, no one calls out. The morning begins not with energy, but with habit. Slow, measured. A group of boys in rough tunics race past, laughing, their sandals slapping against the stones. The Forum was once grander, its statues taller. Now, many of the marble faces are weathered, their noses worn away by time. Still, the place holds dignity and purpose. A dog sleeps in the shade of an olive tree. Fig preserves. Thread fearloom. Their tones are musical, gentle, part of the background hum of the city. The vendor is an old woman with sun-leathered skin. You trade her to copper Follis for a bundle wrapped in cloth. It is neither unpleasant nor sweet, just deeply, viscerally alive. The air smells faintly of olive oil and smoke, but for you it is simply the city. Your city, the only world you have ever known, broken only by the whisper of the Bosporus, lapping gently at the sea walls and the soft rustle of fabric as a monk adjusts his woolen cloak within a distant chapel. The year is 1020 CE, and you are one of nearly 500,000 souls who call this city home. You live near the district known as Etios. Beside you a low clay lamp still glows. Your body aches slightly from the hard straw mat, but it is familiar, expected, and even comforting in its way. Outside, the world still sleeps, but soon the ritual of waking will begin. You do not wake to an alarm, but to rhythm, to the whisper of dawn. You rise, wash your hands and face with water from a basin, not dramatic. The home as a world in Byzantium, the home is not merely shelter, it is a universe. Your home consists of a single main room, perhaps shared with others, a sibling, a cousin, or a parent grown old. Privacy is a rare luxury. The walls are decorated sparsely. A single icon, the Virgin and Child, hangs in the eastern corner. You break your fast with bread from yesterday, soft with a little vinegar. You wrap a woven shawl around your shoulders and step out into the lane. The streets of Etios, the streets are narrow here, the cobblestones worn smooth from generations of footsteps. The scent of the city is complex. As you walk, others begin to emerge. A boy carrying a basket of firewood. You nod to a neighbor. She nods back, then disappears behind her door. There is no small talk. The cistern and the water bearers, one of your morning tasks is to fetch water. You carry a ceramic amphora balanced against your hip. Above ground, a smaller basin collects overflow. Here you fill your vessel, taking care not to spill. Others wait in line, their faces quiet, their hands calloused. Water is life, but it is also labor. Each drop carried home is a quiet victory. You pause for a moment, watching as a small child. On the way to the forum, with your water fetched and your morning meal behind you, the city now begins to wake in earnest. You pass a man sweeping his doorstep with a bundle of twigs. You are making your way toward the Forum of Theodosius. Vendors call out in soft voices, never shouting. You stop to inspect a bundle of dried herbs, mint, thyme, and something bitter you cannot name. Elsewhere, someone buys a spool of wool thread. Another chooses onions, still streaked with soil. The transactions are quiet, familiar. No haggling, no arguments. The market begins to settle as the sun climbs higher. The long shadows of early morning shorten. The warmth deepens, seeping into the whitewashed walls of the buildings, into the cobbled streets beneath your feet. It is the hour for labor now, and the city turns to its work with quiet diligence. In the workshop your steps take you to the small workshop where you spend your days. You are neither noble nor wealthy, but you possess a trade, one passed from your father, or perhaps learned from a neighbor in your youth. Thread over thread, line by line. The pattern is simple, but the rhythm brings comfort. Each pass of the shuttle makes a soft whispering sound. You pause to adjust the tension, then begin again. You set down your tools and step into the shade. It is time for the Mesembria, the midday pause. Constantinople does not rush its meals, nor does it make much of them. The food is plain, nourishing, and familiar. Someone mentions that a relative has joined a monastery in Byzantine. One man sips, wipes his beard, and murmurs a prayer under his breath. Another leans back against the sun-warmed stone and closes his eyes. Still warm, but with a golden cast that speaks of its waning, the shuttle resumes its whisper. A neighbor asks to borrow a strip of leather cord. The tasks come one by one, and you answer each with quiet diligence. No urgency. The world outside continues, but for now it does not call, heads nod in approval. Inside, the loom sits heavy, its wooden frame smoothed from years of use. The shuttle rests on a low bench beside a jar of dyed thread. Women sweep their stoops. Boys chased each other through the alleyways, shouting and laughing in a dozen dialects. You trade a small handful of dried figs for one loaf and tuck it into your sack. For a small fee, you are permitted a place to sit, to wash, and to rest. An old man sits at the corner of the bathhouse, playing a lyre with slow, deliberate notes. The walls are tiled in pale stone, and water flows gently from bronze spouts. You remove your tunic, rinse yourself with a ladle of warm water, and let the weariness of the day loosen from your muscles. Perhaps you are a weaver, a leather worker, a scribe's assistant. You step into the cool air, the breeze lifting your tunic gently, as the light continues to soften. No one speaks above a murmur. The bathhouse is not a place for noise. Then you sit quietly, eyes up, listening to the soft trickle of water and the quiet hum of the building. For reflection, your back aches, not sharply, but with the dull insistence of many hours spent bent to your task. A girl kneels beside it, her hands cupped to drink. A mosaic nearby, though faded, still shows the image of a peacock. Its tiles catch the fading sun. You rub your hands together, the calluses scraping gently, and feel a kind of satisfaction. Not joy, not pride, just the calm certainty of having done what was required. Around you, in adjoining workshops, others labor too. Potters at their wheels, coopers tightening the hoops of barrels, children sorting scraps of cloth. A boy nearby sings under his breath, an old folk song in Greek, forgotten by the next street, but a companion for your hands. Today, we imagine you are a weaver. The shop is small, little more than a shaded stall beneath the overhang of your cousin's house. You tie your apron and begin. Your fingers move not quickly, but steadily. The midday meal, as the sun reaches its zenith, the workshop grows warm. You sit in the shade of a fig tree with two others from the nearby workshops. Between you, a shared cloth is laid with barley bread. The air smells of garlic, vinegar, and the slow-cooked earthiness of legumes. Someone has brought a small round of cheese wrapped in fig leaves. A few words about the price of salt. A new law passed by the city council. A jug of water passes from hand to hand. Afternoon tasks and the city's pulse. Far away from the district of the Augustine, the distant ring of bells signals the 9th hour, the hour of reflection, of slowing. You pause, set aside your thread, and stretch your arms. The neighborhood, a living tapestry. As you leave your work for the day, the neighborhood around you breathes with renewed life. You pass by a baker's stall and catch the scent of paxamadia. A narrow path takes you past the neighborhood fountain. The water splashes into a stone basin carved long ago, now softened by time. You greet a widow who sits outside her door spinning thread. She lifts her hand in reply. Her fingers never stop moving. The communal bath before you return home. You stop at the local. Inside, the air is thick with warmth. Not steam exactly, but a dry, calming heat. Others are here too, men of your district, familiar and quiet. You wash your feet, your hands, your neck. When you leave, your skin is clean, your body warm. Twilight, prayers, and the threads of night, and the city of Constantinople, jewel of the Eastern world. The high heat has passed, and in its place comes a golden hush, a pause in the daily rhythm that is neither rest nor motion. You move with it, as your ancestors did, as your neighbors do still. There is no rush, no clamor, only the slow descent into evening. Vespers and the echo of bells. The space is dim. On the eastern wall stands a carved wooden screen. From a nearby chapel, the soft clang of begins again. It calls the faithful to Vespers, the evening prayer. You follow a quiet path to a small church tucked between narrow homes. Built modestly, its dome little more than a shallow bowl beneath the sky. Though you do not attend daily, tonight you feel the draw. At a street corner, an old man sings a hymn while tuning his lyre. Nothing more is needed. The notes drift down the alley like petals on water. Supper is simple. Barley porridge with lentils and a drizzle of oil. A comment about a cousin's new child. A remark on the bishop's sermon. Nothing urgent, nothing loud. You eat from a shallow dish with a wooden spoon, slowly, steadily. A deacon chants the first prayer, his voice low and resonant. It is in Greek, but the words need not be understood. Their tone is enough. You sit on the low stool, stretch your legs, and listen. The distant roll of a cart. The occasional murmur of two paddles. But mostly there is quiet, not emptiness. They rise and fall like the sea, lapping against the walls of your mind. Darkness envelops the room, but it is not a frightening dark. It is full, soft, familiar. For a while there is nothing but breath, candlelight, and the murmur of devotion. No pews. You stand like everyone else. A sea breeze lifts your hair and carries with it the smell of salt, as it has for centuries, as it will for centuries more. And above the great dome of Hagia, Sophia catches the moonlight. on its leaden curves, casting a silver halo over the sleeping roofs below. The Virgin and Child gaze outward, their gold halos soft in the flickering light. You murmur a final prayer for health, for peace, for protection from fire, theft, and illness. And as sleep begins to take you, you carry the rhythm of your city into your dreams. You cross yourself slowly, once, twice, 3 times. On the city's edge, fishermen rise early to prepare their nets. A midwife in another district tends to a mother in labor, her hands gentle, her voice steady. Place a few herbs. Lavender, chamomile. Their scent is calming, and the habit is old. The walk home, but with coals carried from house to house in small brass bowls. Their glow reflects in puddles, turns cobblestones, gold, and flickers in the polished bronze that trims some of the better home. When you step outside, the sky is lavender and the air cooler. Children are being called indoors. Lamps are being lit one by one, not with flames. You walk slowly. There is no need to hurry. You pass a neighbor drawing water from the public basin. Supper in the home back home. The small clay lamp is lit again. Its flame is steady, its scent faintly sweet. There is talk, but soft, slow, and spare. You finish your food, rinsed your bowl in a corner basin. Outside, the sounds of the city are few now. Evening rituals before bed, you tend to small tasks. You check the wick in your lamp, fold the claws you use for your work. Then you stand again before the icon. You cross yourself 3 times and blow out the lamp. You settle onto your straw mat, wrap your wool blanket around you, and close your eyes. The city exhales. The night of the city. Outside your home, Constantinople sleeps, but not completely. Monks chant psalms in the distant halls of Studian monastery. The great walls that ring the city stand cold and unmoving. The streets of Chalcopretia, Roshani and Sumathia, you are a thread in this great tapestry. Small, perhaps, but woven deep. The bread, the bell, the loom. And the next, let the bells of history fade behind the fog of memory. Let your body grow still once more. The present is far away, and even the bustling streets of Constantinople have grown distant now. We are travelling back, not only in time, but into a quieter chamber of the past. One not lined with triumphs and trumpets, but with footsteps in mosaic halls, the muted rustle of embroidered cloaks. Come, let us walk beside a boy named Beza. Birth in the purple, he was born in the legendary purple chamber of the great palace of Constantinople. Sometime in the winter of the year 958 CE, the chamber's walls were veined with porphyry stone. Only children of reigning emperors were born there. As a boy, he likely did not understand the weight of his birth. He played beneath painted ceilings. He drank goat's milk from silver bowls. He was dressed in silk before he could speak. It was a quiet kind of coronation, one of blood, to bow at the right moment and look downward at all others. The exact cause is lost in the murmurs of history. Poison, some whispered, or a fever. Basil was barely 5 years old when his father died. leaving the empire not to a man, but to two boys. A boy who watched more than he spoke, who listened more than he laughed. Instead, he preferred order, ritual, stillness. He walked barefoot in the palace gardens in the early morning. He sat for hours in the library, silent beneath the cracked gaze of golden mosaics. Basil was the son of Romanos II, Emperor of the Byzantine Empire, a woman whose beauty was whispered about even in distant courts. It is never safe. A shifting childhood, the palace halls were vast, but always watched. Every meal might be laced with tension, every servant a listener. Basil was 11, signed decrees, attended processions, but in truth he was still a figurehead. He wore the crown, but it weighed little. And this, more than anything, Basil despised. Romanos too died young, too young, not because it wished to, but because there was no one else left. His voice is low, his eyes dark, his garments simple, plain silk, no gold thread. He does not joke, he does not drink to excess. He does not dance. Then came the generals, strong men with stronger wills. But real power lay elsewhere in the hands of the generals. The governors, the wealthy landed families who had carved the empire into fiefdoms of gold and grain. But even now, the shape of the man to come is already formed. Most powerful among them, Knight, a battle-hardened warrior who took Theophano as his wife and the crown as his own. The empire was ruled not by them, but for them. First came their mother, Theophano, clever, and so Basil grew not as a prince in command, gods in every archway. Still he learned. He learned to walk without sound, to speak only when required, austerity and study. Unlike many princes of his time, he was not drawn to the arts, to poetry. His tutors noted his discipline. They expected coldness, even cruelty, but it did not come. Basil was not cruel. He was distant, detached, surrounded by shadows. First, Nycphro's focus, Basil's stepfather, was murdered by his own general, John Zimisces, in the year 969. John took the throne. He ruled with charisma and a soldier's flair, but died mysteriously in 976. Basil was 18. Now, at last, the empire turned to him. Emperor at last, but not yet free at 18. The young emperor lived under careful supervision. He performed rituals, not the generals, not even the lack of control, but the illusion, the false throne. So, quietly, over years, not months, he began to reclaim it. A personality of iron and silence imagined him in those early days of rule. The entrance to the great palace. He speaks little. He watches. It would be decades before he was fully in command. A man who would not rule for glory, but to outlast the quiet ascent. Basil's long war against the aristocracy. The corridors of the palace are unchanged, but Basil's footsteps now carry weight. He is no longer a boy, but not yet a ruler in full. The throne beneath him is gilded, yes, but also surrounded. We now enter the long middle of Basil's reign, a time not of glory, not yet, but of slow accumulation, of an emperor gathering power grain by grain like sand in a glass, but by sheer force of stillness. A government of others, the Byzantine aristocracy of the 10th century was unlike any other. Powerful families controlled not only land. They built churches, issued decrees, raised fortresses, and occasionally, if emboldened, crowned emperors. At Basil's accession, many expected the same, that he would become a ceremonial figure, draped in silk and ritual. The generals Bardas Clerus and Bardas Phocas, both from old military families, led powerful uprisings in Anatolia. They had allies, resources, experience. Basil had only a title, but titles in Byzantium were never mere decoration. War without fireworks, Basil did not launch his response in a blaze of rhetoric or blood. He waited. He used the power of appointment, carefully placing men of modest birth. Their estates spanned miles of fields, olive groves, and mountain villages. Some even minted their own coins. When Sclerus rose again, Basil suppressed him not with drama, but with constancy. Campaigns fought methodically, year after year. No grand victories, no triumphal parades, quiet and relentless. He issued land reforms, capping the amount of land a single family could legally hold. He revived obscure laws about peasant protections, using them to claim estates back into the hands of the imperial treasury. He offered pardons to wavering nobles, then replaced them once the threat had passed. A third had its sons conscripted and dispersed across distant provinces. When Bardas Clerus rebelled, Basil resisted at first through negotiation. He fought on foot, alongside his men. He slept in tents, ate their rations, shared their dust. He gave no stirring speeches. He issued no manifesto. His leadership was never theatrical. It was simply dependable. The battlefields of Anatolia, the vast inland heartland of the empire, was the stage for Basil's long struggle. Here, families like the Phocades and Scleroi had ruled like miniature kings. They maintained private armies. Basil knew that no emperor could be secure so long as these lords held sway. So he began a quiet campaign of attrition. Where he found support, he rewarded modestly. Where he found resistance, he acted decisively. Another was exiled to distant monasteries. Basil did not shout. He pruned. Law, not drama, what makes Basil so unlike other rulers. No great basilicas bear his name. No epic poems immortalize his speech. He did not stage public displays of piety or rage. He codified tax exemptions for monasteries, while ensuring they did not expand their lands unlawfully. He expanded the imperial legal code, particularly in relation to rural land ownership, to prevent smallholders from being absorbed into aristocratic estates. These laws were not glamorous, but they reshaped the empire. Quietly, they recentered authority in Constantinople. And with every line of ink, every clause enacted, Basil pulled a little more power toward the crown. the bureaucracy as weapon. Basil also understood that in Byzantium, parchment could be sharper than steel. He gave generously to the church, yes, but without grandeur. He funded repairs to chapels in Cappadocia. He used the imperial bureaucracy not just to govern, but to control. He personally reviewed tax records. He conducted regular audits of provincial governors. He wrote notes in the margins of reports, sometimes correcting scribes, sometimes suggesting small but permanent administrative changes. He demanded efficiency, not loyalty alone, and slowly the empire began to mirror its ruler. Stillness as strategy contemporaries. He did not write letters to foreign rulers filled with poetic flourishes. He simply endured, where other emperors had fallen, to vanity, to overreach, to assassination, Basil remained. He wore simple robes, often dyed a dull blue rather than imperial purple. He attended liturgy with the common people, standing in the rear beside the eunuchs and scribes. He walked the palace gardens alone beneath the fig trees in silence. A religion of silence, though deeply pious, Basil's faith was also quiet. He made donations to remote monasteries in the Anatolian highlands. He is not remembered for building cathedrals, but for preserving them. He read scripture nightly, sometimes aloud. His favorite passage, some said, was from the Psalms. "Be still and know that I am God." It echoed the rhythm of his life, the long shadow, the Bulgarian wars, and the lonely triumph of the earth. His robes remained plain, his gaze focused, his voice steady, but the burdens on his shoulders deepened. Power, once seized, must be defended. Now we walk beside Basil, but of decades of movement. The Bulgarian Zadam, ruled by Tsar Samuel, had risen not as an external invasion, but from lands once governed by Byzantium itself, a slow chisel against stone. This is the tale of his long campaign against the Bulgarian Zodam. Fortresses once Roman flew new banners. Cities pledged loyalty to foreign crowns. Samuel ruled from Orod, not far from the lake that bore its name, with a fierce and fervent devotion to independence, but whispered in corridors, etched into law, and buried in the silence of fields. The edge of the empire, the empire's northern frontier, along the rugged Balkan mountains, was never still. Since the days of the Emperor John Tzimiskes, these territories had slipped from imperial grasp. Byzantine forces, confident and uncoordinated, Basil narrowly escaped with his life. To Basil, it was not just a matter of conquest. And so he began, not with sudden fire, but with slow steel. The strategy of In 986, early in his reign, Basil led a campaign into Bulgarian territory. Valleys ran like veins through the hills, dotted with fortresses on every peak. Supply lines were long, and winter came quickly. The Battle of Trajan's Gate was a humiliation. But unlike other emperors who might seek quick vengeance or retreat to ceremony, he stood at the gates of cities that surrendered only after weeks of siege, and others that burned before they fell. He waited. He did not storm back with fury. Instead, he returned to Constantinople reviewed his ranks, and began the slow process of outlasting his enemy. He rarely addressed his soldiers directly, but they followed him because he never asked of them more than he would do himself. He fortified roads. He stationed loyal administrators in the frontier cities. He reviewed reports from provincial governors at night, and then he began again, year after year. No single campaign broke Bulgaria, but neither did Basil retreat. His strategy was not brilliance, constant, unrelenting, silent pressure. A landscape of stone and wind, the terrain was unforgiving. The mountains were steep, forested, and fog-choked. He crossed rivers on makeshift bridges, his horse slipping on wet stones. The army learned his rhythm. No indulgence. No campfires visible to the enemy. No boasting before battle. Rations were simple. Discipline absolute. Still, Basil did not shout orders. A war of letters and ledgers, even during these campaigns. He sent letters to Constantinople, issuing instructions on taxes. He paid for war not with conquests alone, but with efficiency, reducing graft in the bureaucracy, cutting waste in the army's provisioning, demanding fair tolls on grain and fodder. Even the war, in Basil's eyes, was not just a campaign of spears. It was an exercise in imperial order. Tsar Samuel, a mirror in the mountains. Opposite Basil stood Samuel of Bulgaria. He moved his capital frequently to avoid capture. He launched surprise attacks, burned supply depots, liberated towns. Where Basil was stone, Samuel was flame. And yet, flame tires. Over time, Samuel's resources grew thin. His allies failed. His lands, slowly, almost Basil took fortresses one at a time, secured, sealed roads, built garrisons. Bulgaria, after decades of war, was once again. By the year 1014, after nearly 30 years of resistance, Samuel's army was shattered at the Battle of Cledia. The Byzantines, methodical and prepared, used siege engines to pin the Bulgarian forces in a narrow pass and overwhelmed them. He ordered that the Bulgarian church remain safe. He allowed local customs to continue. It was decisive, but even then, Basil gave no triumphant speech. He continued the campaign. The aftermath, silence, not celebration. After Cledion, a grim story circulated, one often repeated, but softened here. That Basil ordered the surviving Bulgarian soldiers to be blinded, row by row, leaving every 100th man with a single eye to guide the rest home. True or not, the story persisted, and it earned him a name, Bulgaractus, the Bulgar Slayer. But Basil never used the title. He never included it in decrees, never wore it in processions. To him, victory was not an occasion. It was a requirement. The long final march in 1018. And yet, there was no great entry into Constantinople. He visited cities himself. He oversaw the oaths of local governors. He re-established taxes, but lightly. This was not conquests for glory. This was reconstruction. He ruled from the frontier for 2 more years, long after the war had ended, ensuring every stone was set. Twilight in the garden, the final years, and the emperor alone, there comes a point in every life, even the life of an emperor, where triumph softens into memory, where the sword is placed in its scabbard for the last time, where no battles remain to be won, only duties to be completed. There was no triumphal arch waiting, no proclamation carved into marble. Let us now walk beside Basil, not in war, but in the corridors of twilight. As he governs an empire from within the stillness he so carefully built. He signed edicts confirming the rights of local aristocrats, appointed new bishops, inspected roads and grain stores. He asked no questions about loyalty. He simply watched, took note, and left orders. He was older now, lean, worn. His beard was grey at the chin. An emperor without ceremony after final annexation of Bulgaria in 1080. Basil did not return to Constantinople with laurels or parades. Instead, he remained in the north for more than a year. He visited towns and forts personally. By the time he returned to the capital, the city had changed little. But he was no longer the boy who would walk the palace gardens in silence. But the rhythm of his rule continued, steady, familiar, absolute, the garden and the quiet hours. In his final years, Basil spent more time in the gardens of the Palace of Blosheny, north of the main complex. They were not grand, not manicured. He preferred the older paths, shaded by fig trees, no children hidden in monasteries or favored nephews groomed for succession. When asked, he would say little on the subject. He gave alms to the poor from his own personal treasury. He donated books, not jewels. He would walk alone, wearing a simple cloak, his steps nearly silent. There he read. He read military reports, yes, but also psalms, theological commentaries, the chronicles of older empires. Not for entertainment, but for grounding. He sometimes spoke to the monks who kept the imperial library. Even in aging, Basil remained precise. He ate little, slept sparingly, and rose before sunrise. The refusal of comfort, unlike most rulers of his era, he had no known consorts, no heirs. Some believed he feared plots, others that he considered no companion worth the distraction. But perhaps, just perhaps, Basil had come to see power not as a family inheritance, but as a burden, one he had chosen to carry alone. He wore no crown outside ceremony. His sleeping chamber was said to be Spartan. A small bed, a wooden cross, a basin for washing. He slept with a dagger beneath his pillow until the day he died. Governance until the end. Basil governed until the very last year of his life, with the same methodical pace he had always kept. He reviewed military reports daily. He continued to read dispatches. He dictated brief responses. He whispered prayers in the chapel of St. Stephen near the palace gate. He ordered the construction of small fortresses on the Armenian frontier. He intervened in court disputes in distant provinces. He refused lavish gifts. He forbade the use of imperial funds for feasts in his name. He lived not like a man trying to be remembered, but like one determined not to be distracted. The final winter in 1025, after a reign of nearly 50 years, Basil II fell ill. The exact cause is unknown. It came not with spectacle, but with quiet, weakening, pain in his side. He remained in the palace, but refused to remain in bed. As his strength faded, he made one final request, that he not be buried in the imperial mausoleum beside Constantine, beneath the dome of the Church of the Holy Apostles. Instead, he asked to be buried in the church of St. John the Theologian. It continued. The bureaucracy functioned. The generals obeyed. The city woke and slept. The lamps were lit near those who had served him. A tomb of words and stone, a simple inscription, was carved on his tomb. It read, "He who once made the lands of the Bulgars subject to the Roman Empire rests here. No mention of his birth, no mention of his long reign, no family name." Just one line, a sentence of stone, measured, sparse, permanent, like the man himself. The echo of stillness when Basil died, the empire did not weep in panic. His brother, Constantine VIII, succeeded him. Where Basil had walked in silence, Constantine held banquets. Where Basil had counted copper coins, Constantine lavished gold. And slowly the threads Basil had so tightly woven began to fray. Basil had ruled as no one else, not with noise, not with glory. The emperor alone he left behind, no palace wing, only roads, fortresses, ledgers, enemies pacified, and silence, the kind that comes not from absence, a stillness earned. Entering the monastery, a world of quiet stone, let your thoughts drift, not into action or urgency. Imagine yourself not in a palace, not on a battlefield, old-weathered and waiting. The gates are open, the air is cool, the icons shimmer faintly in the half-light, and within a story unfolds, not of kings or wars, but of tiles, of gold, of silence turned to art. A sacred space at the edge of empire, but the name remained. Our story begins not at the center of power. On the western edge of Constantinople, nestled near the Theodosian walls, stands a monastery, quiet, low, and unassuming. It is called Cora, meaning in the country. Once it stood beyond the city's formal walls. Over time, the city grew around it. Cora, the distant hum of the city has faded. No merchants, no clattering carts, no chant of crowds. A place apart. Approaching the outer narthex, low stone walls, pale brick, flecked with white mortar. A modest dome above a vaulted portico. You walk a narrow stone path shaded by fig trees and wind-swept cypress, just bird song. The monastery appears not as a fortress or palace. At the entrance stands the outer narthex, the vestibule before the sacred interior. Its doors are wooden, iron-bound, worn smooth from centuries of hands. But slowly it comes into view. Not suddenly. You reach out, push gently, and step inside. Your footsteps echo softly. She does not look at you, but through you, into the space between time and breath. First glimpses of gold together, they shimmer like a still lake rippling beneath the dawn. The light is dim, gold, tiny shards, placed side by side across domes and arches, not flat, but angled, each piece tilted to catch the light just so. To look at them is not to see art, but to step into contemplation. They are cut by hand, often shaped with tiny hammers. Each is colored, not painted, but fused with minerals. Cobalt for blue, iron for red, gold leaf for divine light. The outer narthex is adorned with mosaics, images made from glass, stone, and powdered gold pressed into plaster. They do not shout, they whisper, light enters, scatters. The effect is not bright, but luminous, a glow without source. Over time, it was destroyed. Above you, a mosaic of the Virgin Mary, holding the Christ child, framed by angels. Her gaze is solemn, not stern, just eternal. On the walls, scenes unfold in quiet sequence. The genealogy of Christ, stories of saints, the presentation in the temple. To do so would be to claim what was meant to be invisible. Every image is still, every tile deliberate. The art of stillness. Byzantine mosaics are not meant to dazzle. They are not decorative. They are icons, windows into the divine, not portraits of it. Each piece of glass is no larger than a fingernail. Placed into wet lime plaster, the tiles are pressed at angles. To sit on the smooth bench along the wall, to tilt your head back and breathe, to let the light of gold and blue and ochre soften your thoughts. The masters who made them did not sign their work. Built on ruins, rebuilt. Again. Its origins lie in the 5th century, perhaps earlier. The current form, the one you now walk through, took shape under the patronage of Theodore Met, a scholar and statesman of the 14th century. The empire was smaller by then, fragile surrounded, but Methikites, in the face of decline, commissioned beauty. He did not raise armies. He restored Korah. He brought artisans, theologians, philosophers. He paid them not to preserve the past, but to offer a vision. And so you stand beneath it now, not to observe, but to rest. This is no museum. This is no palace. This is the rhythm of sacred time, pressed into stone, one tile at a time. Crossing the threshold, you take a step forward. This is the space between spaces, a passage not only from outer to inner, but from earthly to sacred, from self to soul. You look up. Everything is softened by the curve of the vaults, by the weathering of time, and by the golden tone that suffuses the walls. The ceiling is curved, domed, and inset with mosaics, that it feels less like viewing artwork and more like floating beneath an illuminated manuscript, one written not with ink, but with light. There are no harsh outlines here, no garish depiction. Scenes in gold and dust, but as a figure of divine obedience, of quiet strength, of human longing touched by the eternal. Directly above you, a series of mosaics unfolds, like verses of a poem, side by side, illuminated by ambient light. This is the cycle of the Virgin, a series of panels detailing the life of Mary, not merely as the mother of Christ. You see, the Annunciation, Mary, her hands raised in startled grace, a soft blue robe flowing around her feet. The Nativity, a cave rendered in subtle grey stone. The infant swaddled not in royal silk, but in simplicity. Animals near the edge, their forms quiet. The presentation at the temple, a mosaic of motion and ritual, robes folded with mathematical care, gold tesserae shining behind each halo. There are no crowds in these images, no chaos, and upon that, a smoother finishing plaster, where each tiny tessera was pressed with the edge of a small bronze blade. They are like dreams remembered in peace. The hidden work of the masters, the mosaics, were not made quickly. They were not installed all at once. They were laid tile by tile, over years, perhaps. Beneath each mosaic lies a layer of lime mortar. Artisans worked, no voices. Only the gentle scrape of glass against plaster, the muted hum of a chant from the chapel beyond. Eternity, after all, is not in a hurry. Symbols in the pattern, every figure, every flower, every fold in every robe, carries meaning. A four-pointed star above Mary's shoulder is not an ornament. It marks her virginity before, during, and after childbirth. A kind of opening in the fabric of the world where heaven leaned gently. A curved fish etched into the background of a seaside scene is not incidental. It is the earliest Christian symbol for Christ himself. A three-armed cross held by an angel signals the Trinity. It invites, your chest slows, your muscles release their tension, your eyes adjust to the glow. It does not shout, it whispers, stay, wait, listen. The philosophy of the image. To those in the Byzantine world, an icon or mosaic was not merely a picture. When you gaze at an icon, you do not look at it. By midday, when a shaft of sun enters the narrow window slit near the dome, the gold tiles shimmer, not like mirrors, but like still water catching the breeze. It looks at you. The entire space feels like a room inside a candle. And so it is here, in the inner narthex, that you begin to feel the effect. Not in words, but in breath. You do not need to understand the theology. The daily life of Constantinople, the carts, the shouts, the coins, the fish, the robes, all has passed into distant murmur. Here there is only gold and stone and silence. A silence so complete it feels like sound. You only need to rest within it. Light that changes as the day moves, so too does the mosaic. Not the tiles themselves, of course, but their light. In the early morning, the glow is faint, like a blush of dawn. The blues darken. Even the shadows seem sacred. You sit now on a low stone bench built into the wall. Your hands rest in your lap. Your breathing is soft. The outer world has faded. Let yourself drift. The mosaics will remain. The Paraclesian, where death meets light. You've passed through the narthex now. through the soft gold of the mosaics, the gentle shimmer of angelic faces, and the hush of holy narratives. Now you step into a space not built for the living alone. For waiting, this is the Paraclesion, the side chapel. A single archway leads into the space. It is neither grand nor hidden, simply present, patient, waiting. A chamber not for fear, but for preparation. This is where light meets the end of time. You'll leave behind the main axis of the church and enter a narrower hallway. Your feet cross stone floors, worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps. You step into a room of cool light and painted shadow. Here, unlike the rest of the church, the walls are not covered in glittering mosaics. They are covered in frescoes, images painted directly into the wet plaster. The effect is softer, deeper, more intimate, less reflective, more embracing. The color palette shifts. Gone is the celestial gold of the narthex. In its place are hues of rose, charcoal, of sleep. You turn slowly in the space. Every surface speaks. Directly ahead is the great Anastasis fresco, a vision of Christ descending into Hades, not in wrath, but in radiant calm. With one hand, he grasps Adam, lifting him gently from a tomb. Around them are the ancient righteous, David, Solomon. With the other, he reaches for Eve, still cloaked in the robes of humanity, her head bowed. There is no torment here, no flame, no screaming demons. Hades lies shattered beneath Christ's feet, not vanquished by force. Locks, chains, and gates lie broken. Just release. It is not a fresco of triumph. It is a fresco of hope. Step closer. Look at the detail in Adam's hands, not clenched, but open. The folds of Christ's robe, not static, but caught in motion. The quiet tilt of John the Baptist's head, like one listening to a hymn, long remembered. The paint here is thin in places, worn by centuries of breath and incense and candle smoke. But it does not need restoration. Its wear is part of its message. Frescoes are ephemeral. Unlike mosaics, they do not gleam. They age, they soften. And in this softening, the Paraclesion was not merely decorative. It was a tomb chapel. Along its walls lie sarcophagi built into niches. Here rested monks, nobles, donors, perhaps even members. There are no grand effigies, no armored statues, only modest symbols. A cross, a vine, a Greek phrase from the Psalms. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone. The dead here were not celebrated in stone. They were held by it. The frescoes above, not reminders of judgment. The figures beside him recede. You walk past each recess slowly, quietly. A breath, a voice once heard in these halls, and now stillness. Even here the light matters. Narrow slits in the stone walls allow natural light to enter. In the morning the space glows pale gold. At sunset the fresco of the Anastasis seems to move, and then nothing. Night they accompanied, but never empty. The frescoes remain, and in the dark they wait, from light to quiet. And yet there is no fear, only the deep, slow certainty that all things return, that all light, once cast, echoes forever in the mosaic of time. The theology of this space is not argued. It is not even taught. Each figure reminds the viewer, death is not the end. The rich who entered this space did so not to assert power over death, but to surrender to it, gently, quietly, as monks surrendered their will to God. Here, images did not preach. Icons are companions, not guards. They do not speak unless spoken to. They do not judge unless misunderstood. They are simply there, watching, waiting. You sit again, you breathe. The floor beneath you is cool. Your shoulders relax. You have walked from outer to inner, from gold to ash. The return to the world, reflections of Cora. In the everyday there is no chime. Leaving Cora is not a door you close, but a breath you exhale. The chapel behind you does not vanish. It lingers. Your legs are still, your breath slower than before. You place your palm briefly on the edge of the doorway as you pass through. A silent acknowledgement. The fresco of the Anastasis still watches you as you turn, in the rhythm of your steps, in the way your fingers move, in the hush that now lives quietly inside your chest. You walk back into the city, but you carry the monastery with you. The hinges sigh like an old monk rising from sleep. Leaving the Paraclesian, you rise slowly from the stone bench. The Paraclesian is dim, cool, and fragrant. Back through the inner narthex, you move quietly, your footsteps echoing softly as if the walls are listening. The images on the ceiling, the cycle of the Virgin, the Annunciation, the Visitation, the Nativity, are still there. You do not stop this time, but they accompany you. The gold glows faintly, like memory itself. As you step into the outer narthex, the light from the world beyond begins to return. Dustier touched by olive branches and sky. Beyond them, the fields where peasants harvest onions and lentils, where travelers rest in the shade of fig trees. A child laughs as he chases a ball made of wound cloth. A woman bends to stir a pot near her doorway. Crossing the threshold again, the wooden doors of the monastery creak. As you gently push them open, you step into the courtyard. The stone path, once glowing, is now lined with silver leaf. Sunlight reflected from dew that clings to the vine leaves curling along the walls. The sun has shifted. The shadows are longer now. You do not speak. There are no pilgrims here now, no monks sweeping the stones. Only the whisper of the cypress trees and the quiet rhythm of your own feet returning you to the world. The world beyond the walls outside the monastery, the city of Constantinople, continues, unchanged, unknowing. The walls of Theodosius, tall and thick, stand to the west. Closer by, you pass homes made of stone and timber, the scent of cooking oil rising from their hearths. And yet you are not quite as you were. The silence of Korah still echoes in your breath. The light of mosaics still lingers behind your eyes. The monastery in the market, you walk into the market quarter. There are fishmongers shouting in Greek, Armenian merchants arranging bolts of linen, a Syrian spice vendor lighting a cone of myrrh at his stall. It flashes gold before fading into grey. A living fresco. As the wind lifts it, you see, for only a breath, an image of the Virgin stitched with rough thread clinging to the cloth's fold. It was not made by a and yet it tells the same story. The color glows, just for a moment, like a tessera. Voices blend. The air is alive. And yet here too, you see the monastery, not directly, but in fragments, in the shape of a woman's scarf patterned with stars in blue and gold. In the way a baker's hands fold the bread with slow reverence, like a liturgy of flour. In the sound of a beggar murmuring a psalm near the cistern, his voice weathered but sincere. Korah has not been left behind. It has followed you. Or perhaps it never needed to follow. Perhaps it was always here, threads of light in daily life. You walk past the dye works. A man stirs a pot of mata root, its surface deep red. At the public fountain, a girl fills a clay jar. Near the bathhouse, a washerwoman hangs wet cloth on a line, not holy in the strict sense, but meaningful, weighty. Present, evening in the city, you return home slowly, as the city folds itself into twilight. The lamplighters walk the alleys with slow purpose, their poles held upright, flames flickering against their sleeves. Shutters are closed, doors are bolted. The chant of vespers echoes from a small chapel down the street. You step inside. A lamp, a memory. You light your small oil lamp, a shallow clay dish, its wick charred from use. The flame rises. It does not shine like the mosaics of Korah, but it reminds you of them. The golden walls of Korah remain, not in stone, but in the hush. You sit in silence. The sounds of the city are softened now. Distant footsteps, the low murmur of a lullaby, the squeak of a gate, the clink of pottery. You close your eyes, and the images return. The Virgin in her golden frame, Christ in white, pulling Adam from darkness. The saints in still procession, the walls that shimmered like the inside of a shell. The weightless hush of time made visible. What remains? You will not remember every detail, not every arch, not every inscription, but you will remember how it felt to walk beneath mosaics. You will remember how the monastery was not a building, but a rhythm, one that entered your footsteps, softened your voice, lengthened your breath. You will remember how silence does not mean absence, how stillness can sing, and how, even now, as the lamp flickers and the world quiets itself to sleep. Two worlds in one city. An empire of contrasts. Now the journey brings us full circle, from the hearth of a humble home to the golden corridors of imperial halls, from fish stew ladled in silence to silk robes, from wax candles lit at twilight to oil lamps In this segment, we will explore contrast, not as conflict, but as quiet coexistence. For within Constantinople's walls, the rich and the poor, the crowned and the barefoot, lived beside one another. Within a single block, there may be tailors, weavers, bakers, midwives, and butchers, each family pressed into a space just large enough to hold its own story. Often unseen, often unheard, yet shaping the empire together, one breath at a time. The quarter of the commoner let us begin once again in a familiar place, the working-class districts of Constantinople. Here, stone houses press against one another. Roofs are tiled, though many sag with the weight of age. The alleys between buildings are narrow, barely wide enough for a donkey cart. Children play here. Dogs sleep in the sun. Tradesmen speak in soft voices as they unload baskets of onions. A robe, dyed in murex purple or deep indigo, is laid out, embroidered with tiny pearls or golden thread. The smell is thick. Clay, wood smoke, crushed herbs, human sweat. Life is lived close. Water comes from the cisterns, large communal basins. Breakfast may include honey cakes, dried apricots from Syria, or wheat bread with goat cheese and dates. Firewood is gathered, bread is baked in communal ovens. News is shared not in writing, but in murmurs and nods over jars of vinegar and baskets of dates. The home has no luxury, but it has rhythm. And rhythm, as we've seen, is its own form of beauty. The mansion of the magnate. The bowl is shared, hands are cupped, elbows lean against the knees. Conversation is short, practical. Now, shift your thoughts. Only a few streets away, in Blascherny, or near the Manganai Palace, or within the stately shadows of the Forum of Constantine, the meal is served in courses. Fruits first, then meats or stewed vegetables with spiced wine. Servants clear each plate. Linen cloths are used to wipe hands. An attendant may read aloud from a religious tract or poem. Iron gates separate the garden from the world. Trees line the inner courtyard. The colors are muted, earth brown, dust gray. A belt of rope or leather binds the waist. The feet are wrapped in cloth or simple sandals. Both feel the prick of rough cloth or the pleasure of a new pair of shoes. Both return to their day with full stomachs and steady steps. There are mosaics not only in churches, but on the floors of parlors, depicting peacocks and grapevines. The air is perfumed with rosemary and rosewater. She may not write, but she remembers prayers, stories. The embroidery shows vines, crosses, or even stylized imperial eagles. Gold thread may gleam subtly in the sunlight. She studies the church fathers, the lives of the saints, copies scripture by candlelight. Here, walls are high. The elite household does not rise with the sun, but with the servant. Maids light fires, prepare warm water, polish brass. A bath is drawn, a basin filled, scented with citrus peel. The aristocrat does not fetch his water. The table is prepared with glazed pottery, metal utensils, plates carved of ivory or imported horn. A pet bird, perhaps a dove or falcon, may flutter in the window. They wear finer robes, their names spoken aloud in prayers for the empire's protectors. They may sponsor the feast, the candles, even the wine for communion. The house is quiet, but not from lack of life. Eating at the same hour, a different meal, he holds a taper candle. She watches the incense rise from afar. The chanting fills the nave, but the altar is distant. In the mid-morning, both commoner and noble may pause to eat. But what they eat, and how they eat, reveals their worlds. Not always peacefully, not always justly, but always, always together. For the empire was built by emperors. Yes, but also by hands stained with olive oil, by voices chanting in the dark, by feet that swept the marble floors of places they would never rule. The commoner sits on a stool or stone ledge, using fingers or a wooden spoon to dip coarse bread into lentil stew or soft cheese. The noble reclines on a cushioned bench or sits at a carved table. Yet both feel hunger, both seek warmth. Clothing, rough weave, and woven gold, to see the class divide. The worker wears a tunic, simple, often patched, made from undyed wool or linen. The elite wears layers, an inner robe of silk, an outer cloak called a cloak, dyed in colors reserved for high rank, imperial, purple, deep crimson, sea. Jewelry is modest by modern standards, but fine. Earrings of filigreed bronze, a pendant set with lapis or garnet, a gold ring bearing a carved icon. And yet, both must dress for weather. Education, voice, and silence. In matters of learning, the commoner may not read, but he knows the Psalms, not from parchment, but from song. The elite child, by contrast, learns letters. He recites Greek grammar. A noble might quote Plato, a peasant might quote a proverb. Both are speaking wisdom, but only one will be written down. Faith for all, ritual divided both rich and. The commoner stands in the back, near the columns, shoulder to shoulder with other worshippers. The elite may be seated closer, near the sanctuary screen, but all kneel, all cross themselves. All listen when the priest reads, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And so these two worlds, the silks and the straw, live side by side. Power, punishment, and protection. Not merely by decree, but by pages, parchments. These laws touched every life, noble and commoner, soldier and merchant. But how those laws touched them, that was never equal. Come now deeper into the stillness, and let us walk slowly through the corridors of Byzantine justice, where some doors opened with a whisper, and others stayed shut forever. The law as a mirror in Byzantium, law was not arbitrary. It was foundational. It dated back to Justinian Esse Corpus Juris Civilis, a monumental code compiled centuries earlier, copied, amended, and preserved with care. But while the law proclaimed equality before Christ, the application of law often reflected status, wealth, and favor. To read the law is to see two empires on the same page, one for the magnates, another for the market vendor. Justice in the forum, imagine a legal dispute. The noble writes a petition, carefully worded in classical Greek. A nobleman claims a neighbor's servant trespassed into his courtyard. Now imagine a commoner, a baker, whose barrel of flour was stolen from his stall. He walks to the prefect's building himself, waits outside, and pleads with a scribe to record his words. Both seek justice. But only one knows the phrasing, the names, the protocol. Only one has coins to smooth the process. The law is there, but like a river, it flows fastest. For those who live near its source, punishments, equal in name, unequal in weight, theft, but execution was rare. More often, punishment was symbolic, public, and meant to shame. In the Byzantine Penal Code, crimes were carefully categorized. And yet, what counted as justice often varied by class. A noble accused of embezzling taxes might face exile to a distant monastery with food and scripture. A commoner caught stealing a goat might face whipping, public humiliation. For the poor, pain was expected. Peasants often surrendered their farms willingly, not from legality, but from necessity. Not because the law said so, but because society understood it that way. Peasants and protections to protect the rights of peasants. Byzantine law created safeguards. The dignitary powerful landowners were forbidden from acquiring small holdings by force. The Allelingian tax law allowed the state to collect taxes from a rich man if his poor neighbor These rules were noble on parchment, but in practice, few dared challenge a landed aristocrat. In return, they were allowed to remain as tenants, technically free. They lived beneath the law, while the elite lived beside it. The soldiers' exemption. The Byzantine army was filled with stratiotai, soldier farmers who received land in exchange for military service. Their class was unique, not noble, not common. They had the right to bear arms, to ride horses, but if they failed in duty to appear for a campaign or to keep their arms ready, their rights were stripped. Unlike the elite, they had no title to protect them. Unlike the poor, they had everything to lose. If he could not pay the clerk's fee, his case might never be heard. Their loyalty was law-bound, their dignity conditional, and so they lived. Proud, quiet. In the courtroom, voices heard and silenced her dowry might include silk. In theory, all citizens could bring a case before the courts. In reality, access was uneven. The noble had advocates, educated men trained in rhetoric and scriptural argument. He could send written petitions, quoting prior precedent. Her voice was heard less, unless she earned it through wisdom, reputation, or widowhood. The commoner brought his voice, cracked, hurried. If the matter was ecclesiastical, a dispute over tithes, or inheritance, the elite often appealed directly to bishops. For the poor, justice came slower, quieter. Marriage, gender, and honor, even marriage laws, reflected class division. A noble woman could refuse a suitor, especially if he lacked title, land, or connections. She could read. She could command a household of servants. A common woman, though, might marry younger. Her dowry was bread ovens, livestock, homespun linen. Her labor was equal to her husband's. Both were governed by canon law, but the world judged them differently, the other with indifference, who belonged and who watched in official processions, imperial festivals, public prayers, coronations. The social order was visibly enforced. Nobles marched in the first rows in jeweled garments. Soldiers flanked the aegis in armor and dust. Artisans stood behind, beside merchants. The poor, widows, day laborers, orphans, stood on the periphery. How one spoke, how one was seen. The laws held the empire together, but it was the differences in judgment, in privilege, in protection that shaped the rhythm of daily life. They were present, but not included, and yet they watched. They remembered. They passed the stories along in taverns, in whispered songs, in icons painted on backroom walls. The law might separate them, but they still lived in the same city. They still worshipped in the same churches. They still stood beneath the same dome when the rain came. And so the divide between rich and poor in Byzantium was not only about what one had, but how one moved. Feasting and fasting, how the classes celebrated and sacrificed across the empire, days passed slowly, tied to work, worship, and water. But now and then the rhythm broke. A fast day arrived, a saint's feast, a wedding, and when it did, rich and poor alike stepped into ritual, into sacrifice. But though the calendar was shared, the table was not. The emperor and the fishmonger marked the same holidays. The calendar of the holy and the hungry Byzantine life followed a calendar deeply infused with faith. It was not simply secular time. Wednesdays and Fridays were days of fasting, reminders of betrayal and crucifixion. Feast days marked the lives of saints and the turning of seasons. The grand cycles of Pascha, Pentecost, and Nativity gave shape to the year. Both rich and poor obeyed these rhythms. But what they could offer and what they could abstain from differed greatly. Most days were already lean: lentils, beans, onions, coarse bread, and maybe a few olives, if money allowed. The fast for the poor. Daily life without richness. For the poor, fasting was not so different from daily life. On fast days, meat, cheese, and oil were forbidden. But for a weaver in Samothea, or a bricklayer near the sea walls, on fast days the bread was dipped in vinegar instead of oil. There was no loss, only a quieter repetition of the usual. The sacrifice was in intention, not in substance. The fast for the rich, a chosen restraint for the noble. Fasting required more discipline because it required withholding. Their tables on normal days were filled with lamb, veal, pastries, salted fish, wine, honey cakes, and cheeses from distant regions. To give these up, even for a few days, was symbolic. It was not starvation, it was surrender. To realities it reminded them that despite wealth, they were still dust. Some took it seriously. They ate, simply gave alms. Others observed outwardly, but sent servants to add saffron, or to import fruit from warmer lands to soften the fast. Feasting. One word. On the other hand, when feast days came, when fasts ended, the gap between rich and poor widened again. For the commoner, feasting might mean a loaf of soft bread, a small wedge of cheese, white and sharp, wine watered down but sweet, a single egg boiled and shared, a pastry made of sesame and honey prepared by hand. They might eat in a courtyard, light candles, sing a hymn, for the noble feasting was orchestration. The household swelled with guests, bishops, poets, military officers, visiting cousins. The servants laid tables with carved dishes, linens embroidered with crosses and peacocks, silver vessels filled with spiced wine. A banquet might include roast goose with herbs from the palace garden, quail stuffed with nuts and cinnamon, stews of lentils and dried apricots, cheeses from Naxos, dates from Palestine, sweetbreads soaked in rose water and dusted with cloves. There were no menus, only abundance. Weddings, the public union of class weddings. The celebration lasted a day, or an afternoon if work could not wait. Among commoners, weddings were small, intimate, and practical. The bride wore her best tunic, sometimes dyed with crushed berries. Bread was broken, wine was blessed, guests offered coins or loaves. The emperor might send a blessing scroll, not a gift, but a symbol of attention. The ceremony was often held at home, the priest brought in by the family. Among the elite, weddings were stages of politics and prestige. The bride wore silk, perhaps imported from Antioch. Her veil was a gift from her godmother, a noble woman of high station. The groom offered a dowry, often land. The marriage was not only personal, it was strategic. It bound families, built alliances, and secured inheritances. Celebrations might last 3 days. Musicians were hired. Dances were performed. Funerals. Grief wears different robes even in death. A poor man's funeral was solemn, modest, and often communal. Neighbors helped wash the body. A priest came quietly to say the prayers. The coffin was plain wood, sometimes only a burial shroud. The body was taken to a shared grave. The church's land, sometimes just beyond the city walls. There were no eulogies, no sculptures, no records. Only memory whispered by the living, but to anchor their soul in the empire's liturgical rhythm. The funeral of the elite, by contrast, was an event. The body was bathed in rose water, anointed with myrrh. Mourners wore dark purple or deep blue. A professional scribe might recite a panegyric. The sarcophagus was stone, perhaps decorated with icons. Prayers were said by monks in shifts, and often a chapel was built in the deceased's name, not just for memory. Music for all, in different keys both classes sang. In taverns, Workers sang folk songs, stories of saints, of sorrow, of fields and sea. In palaces, choirs sang hymns, but both voices rose, and both were heard. The meeting point where silks and straw touched. There is always a line, but there is also always a bridge. In Byzantium, the rich and the poor, one in villas of mosaic and gold, the other in stone homes warmed by straw and fire. But the city was not divided by walls. It was layered, overlapping. And in certain quiet moments of grief, of prayer, of hunger, of miracle, the edges blurred, and for a breath they touched, banners high. The procession passes everyone behind them. Imagine a feast day. The procession of the cross wins its way through Constantinople. At the front walk priests and bishops in gleaming robes, heavy with brocade and stitched with crosses. But beyond that, the crowd thickened. Widows in woolen cloaks holding candles. Sailors, caps in hand, whispering prayers. Children on rooftops, watching the gleam move below like a river of cloth. No one asks where the nobles end and the poor begin. In that shared gesture, the hand to forehead, chest and shoulders, clasped, disappears. Pilgrimage, the equal road to journey to a shrine, was to step out of rank. The road to St. Thecla's tomb, or to the spring of the Theotokos, nobles rode with guards, tents, and supplies. Commoners walked barefoot, with bundles tied to staffs, but all slept under the same sky, all knelt before the same icon, all drew water from the same spring. No one asked who held titles in the moment of prayer. No one claimed rank in the act of humility. In dust and faith, all became travelers together, disaster and charity, the leveling force when the city burned, when earthquakes came, and they did, often. Marble cracked and thatch collapsed alike. In the fire of 1034, half the city's shops were lost. In the quake of 989, even Hagia Sophia lost part of its dome. In those hours, titles meant little. The rich fled barefoot. The poor carried what they could, and after the churches opened their doors to all. Soup was ladled without question. Icons were kissed by trembling hands, calloused and jeweled, sighed. Suffering and survival bound them, even if only for a moment. Acts of mercy, some nobles remembered. Some gave. Empress Theodora once gave land to widows and freed slaves in honor of her mother's name. A way to gain piety, to build legacy. Basil II, as we have seen, walked among soldiers and fasted alone. Some opened their storehouses during famines. Some built hospices and synodokia, places where the poor and sick might find food, beds, and oil for their wounds. And yet, charity was not always pure. Still, the bread fed the hungry. Even imperfect mercy was still mercy. No velvet ropes. Shared silence in the church, and always, always, the churches remained. At dawn, an old woman might sweep the steps of St. By midday, a noble woman might kneel on the mosaic floor of St. Mary of Bloshany, her rings glinting as she lights a candle. A soldier limps in, his tunic dusty, and crosses himself. A merchant whispers a prayer for safe passage across the sea. No guards keep the poor out, only the scent of wax and incense, only the sound of chant, only the echo of centuries. And in that echo, no one is rich, no one is poor, only present. The empire within the empire in truth. Byzantium was not one empire, but many. One of silk and banquet, scroll and seal ring. One of barley bread, river water, patched tunics. One of icons and incense, of saints and psalms. One of sweat and tax rolls, of banners and clay lamps. But they overlapped. They reflected one another. And even when the nobles dined behind walls and the poor slept near hearths, they shared the same sky, the same liturgy, the same candle, and when they died, they were laid beneath the same earth, perhaps beneath the same cross. And so we rest. The processions have passed. The candles are burned low. The palace halls are still. The stone homes are quiet. Silk robes have been folded. Whether in straw or silk, whether noble or unknown, your breath is part of the same long rhythm, the same empire of light and shadow, chant and silence. The Byzantines have returned to dust, but their echo remains. In mosaics, in manuscripts. Let your eyes close now. Let your breath. The city sleeps. So may you. Straw mats have been laid, and all across Constantinople, from the highest dome to the humblest stable, the people of the empire sleep. They breathe the same air, they dream in the same darkness, and above them the stars shimmer, not for one, for all. Sleep now beneath those same stars.